All right, this is the PWI Podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle, joined as always by my co-host Brian Solomon. What's going on, Brian?
Happy to be here as always, Al. Thank you for
Yes,
having me.
good to be back with you. Plenty to talk about, a little quicker turnaround than usual, and that's good. And we've spent so much time the last few months talking about WWE, rightfully so. With it's the biggest time of the year with WrestleMania and then the Endeavor merger and all that. We're going to kind of turn the page this week and catch up a little on AEW. They've been in the news a lot as of late. Some good, some maybe not so good. We'll discuss all of that, the potential return of CM Punk, the plans to book Wembley Stadium for what should be their biggest show ever, maybe a new TV show in the works for them on Saturdays. We'll talk about all of it. Also going to do a little bit of a check-in on Impact Wrestling. They're also coming off of a big weekend with their Rebellion show, crowning two new world champions. They had both a vacant men's world title and a women's world title, and they filled both of them, interestingly, with people who are married to each other. So we'll talk about that, and also a big debut and Impact and what he can mean for the company going forward. Speaking of Impact and the Women's World Championship, I've got in my hands the June issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, one of the cooler covers we've done in a long time. I think it's fair to say, and then it's getting a lot of love. I saw Mike Sempervive over at Wrestling Observer talking a bit about it, a throwback to the old UWF trophy cover from, it's got to be 40 years ago almost now, right?
I think it was 87, early 87 maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we got the knockouts of the women's division to pose, reaching for what was Mickey's title, not anymore. A fun feature in here by Jason McVeigh, looking at the knockout scene, which he says is the strongest it's ever been. And a lot more in this issue. Again, speaking of Impact, your hot seat interview with the newsmaker this weekend, Nick Aldis. While we're on it, did you feel the news is he showed up on Rebellion and looks to be a major player now in their world title scene? Did he foreshadow any of that at all in your conversation with him?
No, and in fact, when I did it, it was at the time that I actually did the interview. It might have been not long after the Royal Rumble, believe it or not, and the length of time of all these things and everything. Because I remember we were partly talking about how, oh, you know what, a lot of people thought we were going to see you in the Rumble the other day, like that kind of thing, because there was that talk. So I honestly don't think at that time that he really knew where he was going to land yet. I think he was enjoying doing the indie thing, like kind of like doing something similar to what Cody did when he left WWE and kind of having some dream matches and working in places where he really wanted to work. He was wrestling for Bret Hart up in Calgary and things like that. But it's a very timely interview. I mean, Impact did come up just among the many options of where he could go, because I was trying when I did the interview to not just dwell on the Billy Corgan NWA stuff, because that had been the whole kind of like dialogue and discourse when he left. That's all anybody wanted to talk about for a while. He did the interview with Sam Roberts and everything, and I could tell that he didn't want to just make it all about that. So I tried to be forward looking and talk about all the different options, but I think at the time we did the interview, it wasn't really known, although it seems like a good place for him to wind up. I mean, look, I'm sure that anybody in the business would love to go to WWE, especially someone like Nick who's never been there before and all that. But partly we know that WWE has supposedly a hiring freeze going on now in the wake of the sale and everything. And I don't know if that played a part, just similarly with Jay White going to AEW and stuff like that. But I do think it's a great place for Nick to be. And I'm sure that coming in there, I mean, he hasn't been full-time in Impact in like 8 years or something crazy like that. And now he's a bigger deal than he was when he left. So I think he's in a really good position. And I'm sure that his returning, one of the conditions of that, similar to what happened with Cody, is that, he be treated like a major star, which is what he is. So I think it's a good move.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's sort of the perfect move. You talk about, two people or institutions that need each other, Impact and Nick Aldis, they just fit perfectly. I remember some of the buzz about whether Nick Aldis would show up in the Royal Rumble. To me, it was kind of wishful thinking. I think the reality is if he did, it wouldn't have meant a whole lot. A lot of people watching, certainly the building, wouldn't have known who he was. Impact is kind of the perfect fit for him and the perfect fit for Impact because he does have this following. He does have this credibility and respect that he built over his time in the NWA. The reality is that only carries over so much to most other large organizations, whether you're talking in AEW, it might mean a little bit more because they've had this relationship with the NWA where they've featured their wrestlers in their titles. In WWE, it would have meant nothing, honestly. And Impact, it means everything because he's their guy. I mean, that was I thought he did a great job on commentary in that main event. And he did a really good job of putting over the Impact World title. And he said this, talk about this being his first world title and the prestige of that championship. So I think this is a relationship that sort of like fits like a glove.
I think that, the AEW thing, I do think that he would have gotten over better there than, say, WWE for the reason that you explain. I mean, that's one of the things that they do well, at least try to do, which is acknowledge these people that are stars that sometimes a lot of the fans may not know. They're good at that. I mean, they do it with the people coming in from Japan all the time. I mean, where you have to imagine a lot of American fans are going like, who is this guy? But they make you understand that this is somebody that's important that you should care about. So, I mean, I think they would have handled him better than WWE would, but Impact is, I think, for him right now, the better option than AEW.
Yeah, I mean, I think would he have done better in AEW than WWE? Sure. AEW is very crowded. And guys like Nick Aldis, with that kind of level of reputation and where he is at his career, the reality is he would have been crowded out of the very top of the main event scene. Could he earn his way into a spot there? Sure. It might have taken a while if it ever happened. He comes into Impact. Hey, I think we've got somebody joining us. Hold on a sec.
Sure.
Jason McVeigh, very last minute. I think I might have just woken the guy up.
Apologies, gentlemen.
No, us apologize. I literally was
texting you
about a minute before we started. Our original guest, I guess, could make it. And we're talking Impact. You wrote this column in the latest issue about the Impact women. So thanks for joining us, PWI contributor Jason McVeigh. The topic right now, Nick Aldis joining Impact Wrestling, and we both think it's a terrific move. I was just saying, he could have gone to AEW and been in the mix, but probably not in the very top mix. He goes to Impact, and I think you could argue is the top guy already in Impact Wrestling. Do you agree, Jason?
Absolutely. I think I mentioned this to someone recently. I said if he had gone to WWE, they've never really seemed interested in him. So how viable that was. If he had gone to AEW, he would have just been another guy on the roster, somewhere towards the bottom, most likely. Coming back to Impact, it's completely different from his original run there as Magnus. He's went away. He's established himself as a top guy in a promotion of that kind of size. He comes back, as you say, as one of the top guys now in Impact, I think.
I would put one small asterisk on the AEW thing with him because I think a while back there was some rumbling of him coming in there because I think the time to have done that would have been when Cody was still there. Yeah. Because they could have built on, and I think they would have built on the history between those two and the idea of a rubber match, that kind of thing, that there was some interest in. But I think that was probably his best hope for being in the main event picture in AEW, at least in the short term. He could have been brought in the same way they were bringing in the NWA women's champions, even though he wasn't with the NWA anymore, and kind of treating them as stars. But I think that window has kind of closed now. So I think, this was the move for him.
Yeah. And I mean, we should just have this discussion. I was planning to do it later, but while we're on the topic of Impact, Steve Maclin, they put the world title on him, very much in an unknown quantity, I think, for a lot of the wrestling world. I think it's and clearly they're going right to Aldis and Maclin as a program. I think here's a situation where the challenger can really make the champion, right? In as much as again, Maclin a bit of an unknown to most fans. Impact sees something in him. I got to say, I don't know that I'm completely sold just yet on Maclin. I like him. I don't know that I love him. He different than Josh Alexander, where I was at Rebellion last year, where Alexander won the title, and I had already seen it in him. But he was a guy who, like, all right, here's your opportunity. This is the biggest match of your career. Step up, and I thought he did, and I thought he delivered a tremendous performance. This is Alexander a year ago. This was Maclin's opportunity to do that. A different circumstances, different opponent in Kushida, kind of thrown together somewhat last minute because of Alexander's injury. And it was fine. I think Maclin's fine. I think he's good. I like them investing in kind of a homegrown guy who they see something in. Again, I don't know that I'm totally sold on him. I think Aldis is sort of just what the doctor ordered in helping make Maclin. Under that scenario, though, Aldis would be chasing for a while. I mean, I don't think if you have Aldis go in and beat a Maclin in their first match, I don't know if that really helps Maclin kind of be cemented as a top guy. Jason, any thoughts on that? Oh, Jason's kind of frozen.
Oh yeah, he was standing still for so long I couldn't tell. I guess he is frozen. Either that or he's like petrified or something.
Well, why don't you take that, Brian? Any thoughts on Maclin and Steve Maclin and what he brings to the table?
Sorry, guys, I'm not sure.
That's all right. You're moving around a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I agree that he's a little bit of an unproven commodity, but I feel like they needed that right now. That it was the time to kind of try something and call an audible. And I also think they're probably going to be relying on Aldis to sort of elevate the situation, and it's probably a matter of getting the belt to him anyway. I'm kind of wondering if they already knew he was coming in when they were kind of planning all this. So, I mean, I think that's part of it too. I don't know if Maclin if we're really looking at a long-term champion here.
Yeah, Jason, I think we've got you now. Any thoughts on Steve Maclin as the new top guy, world champion in Impact?
Yeah, I think, as someone who's personally does watch Impact every week, I know not everyone does, but there has been a slow and steady build with Maclin to this point. So you could kind of see this coming. And I really do believe, even if Josh Alexander hadn't got injured, we probably would have saw Steve Maclin still winning the title. The difference is, I think fans have accepted him as a challenger. Now it will be, do they accept him as the champion going forward? And I think Nick Aldis will play a big part in actually establishing Maclin as the champion. So yeah, we will see.
So I think it's great that you seem to be more of a fan than Brian and I are in terms of being a weekly watcher of Impact. I admit I'm not watching as closely as I used to. So what does Maclin bring to the table?
He has that intensity. He has that kind of bully mentality, that kind of an old school heel character. Following on from Josh Alexander is a tough ask because he was an excellent champion, in my opinion. It will be just, how does Maclin establish himself as a dominant heel champion? It could be a case, as maybe Brian touched on there, that Aldis could just take the title from him pretty quickly. But just having seen the build that Impact have put into Maclin, I wouldn't be surprised if they do run with him for a while and maybe feed him like the likes of Aldis to kind of build him up there. But I think there's a lot of work that still needs to go into it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it sets up a pretty strong Bound for Glory main event, in as much as that's still like their big show of the year. And I think that's a reasonable length chase between now and October. You could do a match between the two of them ahead of that, even maybe at a Slammiversary. But Aldis comes up short and you drag it out. And I think that's a money match. for in as much as Impact can have a money match these days. But sort of big picture of Impact, again, these pay-per-views are sometimes kind of like the check-in for some somewhat casual fans like myself. And generally I liked what I saw, right? I mean, I thought like production value was pretty spot on. The other big move obviously was putting the women's title. I mean, just crazy circumstances that two of their titles end up vacated and then won by a married couple, Deonna Purrazzo winning a championship. It's cool that, one kind of like the less talked about stories, WWE gets so much credit for how progressive they've been with their women's division, and Impact really was at the forefront of that. And here, kind of like not even talked about that much. They just headlined with a women's a title match. Talk a bit about that, Jason. I mean, in terms of what you wrote the feature in the new magazine, talking about it being the strongest knockouts division. And that says a lot given the history of that division. I mean, again, they were really kind of the pioneers in some of this. Why do you think the women's division right now is so strong? And is Deonna Purrazzo the right flag bearer for that division?
The division's so strong right now, I think, just based on the amount of talent. And there's a great diversity in the talent that they have. They are not really interchangeable. There's a lot of different characters, a lot of different wrestling styles. I touched on it in the feature in the magazine, just of there's so much diversity in the division. This is the second pay-per-view in a row that the women have headlined. Hard to Kill had Mickie James and Jordan Grace in the main event, so this is Jordan's second pay-per-view she's main evented in a row. So Impact are kind of beyond the stage of kind of trumpeting that as a big deal now. It's just part of what they do. Right. And it is almost at the stage where it's kind of 50-50, the weekly show between the men and the women of, the amount of action that you're getting. But I think it's the diversity of the women and the strength of them. They're all pretty good wrestlers that make it special. Going forward with that, I think Deonna is the right choice for me personally. I think right now, they need to bring a bit of stability to that just with Mickey's injury. There's plenty of other up-and-coming women that they can elevate to that. I think Deonna will help with that as well. But I think for right now, she's the perfect person to have the title.
Yeah. I guess I enjoy Impact. Whenever I do turn it on, it kind of puts a smile on my face. I feel like we do this episode once a year, every year, where we talk about the problem is they still have all that baggage, right, from whatever it is, almost 20 years of TNA. And I think they've largely washed it off, but some of it is still there. They're obviously also dealing with just sort of like budget issues and production issues. It doesn't look as major league as it did 10, 15 years ago. The crowds are smaller. It's sort of like a televised indie kind of thing, but on a high level. And one of the things that I kind of like about that is, people look to an AEW as a place that will grab up like the best independent talent. And feature them on television and make national, international stars out of them. And I think that's true. But because of where Impact spot is, they have to kind of like take that extra step of identifying independent talent that hasn't been spotted, by the biggest promoters or scouts. And they're really taking chances and risks on wrestlers that haven't even necessarily really gained that reputation, but somebody there sees something in them and rolls the dice with them, and that's how and they get it right a lot of the time. I mean, you see a lot of those people move on now to NXT or to AEW, so. Almost filling the role of what Ring of Honor did for so long. Impact's doing that now. I think it makes for a fun product. They find space for some veterans with some name recognition that still have some gas left in the tank, like, the Kazarian types. You still see like the Motor City Machine Guns floating around there and Tommy Dreamer and Bully Ray. So I quite like what Impact is doing these days. Brian, are you enjoying it?
I do, and like you're saying, I mean, they've pivoted for sure. I mean, it's not the same company that it was. And the thing that I noticed though, and because I don't think I followed as close as Jason, but I do follow it because of wrestling news, and I report on the weekly shows and things like that. So I have an idea of what's happening in the fan base. The impression that I get is that their audience right now is, I mean, it's a smaller audience. I think their issue is that they need to, it would be great if they could bring in new fans that were new to the product, because I think that would really help them to, complete this rebrand and really be something different. Whereas I get the sense that the large majority of their fan base are people that have been watching a very long time. Yeah. And so they all remember all that stuff that Impact doesn't want them to remember so much anymore. I think it would be great if there was that influx of fans who were like, wow, this is pretty cool. What is this? That kind of thing. That should really be a focus for them.
Yeah. What do you think gets them there, Jason? And what's limiting? They've got the TV that they've got. It's not as good as it was once upon a time in terms of when they were on Spike. It's better than it was other times when they were on Destination America. They're owned by the company that's got them on TV, so that there's they're going to promote them and support them. They're out there doing occasional shows in kind of small, mid-sized venues. Where I saw Rebellion last year was the old Mid-Hudson Civic Center in Poughkeepsie. But, they only had the floor open, so it wasn't even like a big a setup or anything like that. This place, which is, I guess, in their backyard, was at Toronto where they were? They were in Ontario somewhere. Yeah. I thought looked great on TV.
Yeah. The Rebel Complex is one of the best venues Impact, Freudian slip there. One of the best venues that Impact goes to, or that TNA maybe has ever gone to. It looks fantastic on TV. And I think that really kind of reflected in Rebellion. In terms of what they do, I don't know. As someone who has watched the product from 2002, I think the time has almost came and gone where they're ever going to be a number 2 company or ever going to be near that again. I think AEW is now here and Impact aren't going to overtake them. I think that's gone. I think what you're seeing with Impact is I think they have settled into that number 3 role, the likes of a Ring of Honor, the likes of an ECW, and you can see influences of both of those promotions in what Impact is doing now. So I think maybe going forward, they need to establish themselves as the firm number 3 and maybe just run with that and provide that kind of outlet for fans who maybe just want something a bit different, because there is some wacky things in Impact. People get stabbed, people get bumped off and murdered. And, if you're into that, great, Impact's for you. And I think, as exactly what Brian said, most of the viewers of Impact are people like myself who have watched for years. I would be really curious to see what new fans who are new to the product actually think of the current product, because I dare say it is good, and you will see things that you're not getting in WWE or AEW. And I think if they can attract those fans to that, they might get somewhere.
Right, because, fan turnover in wrestling is a real thing. So you can't lose track of the fact that now it's been a number of years. So if you're a young wrestling fan, let's say you're like a guy in your 20s or whatever, like you don't even remember when TNA started, you know what I mean? Like, we're at that point now. So you do have that opportunity for fans who don't have the connotations maybe that a lot of older fans have, simply because they're so young. Like, if you're a fan that started, I mean, they say that a lot of the fans cycle like in 7-year cycles. So let's say that you're a fan that started watching in 2016, right? I mean, that didn't know anything about wrestling before that. That's a great opportunity for a company like Impact. You could just walk right in, and that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking of now, just because, it's been a long time since those days. Like, and I think that's a good thing for them.
Yeah. And I think they can really benefit, again, from becoming the company that spots that talent. Again, the role that Ring of Honor played for a long time, where, when I was going to Ring of Honor shows in the mid-2000s, like, you knew you were watching future WrestleMania headliners, and you were, I mean, it was Seth Rollins, and it was Jon Moxley, and it was, well, actually Moxley not so much, but Samoa Joe, go on and on. It's most of the WWE roster these days, Kevin Owens. And for so long, it was sort of the opposite with Impact, where for better or for worse, the reputation was if you worked at Impact, nobody's going to touch you. I mean, certainly WWE was hands off of anybody who worked on Impact. It was like that TNA stench. There was and the couple times they did it, they had kind of buyer's remorse, whether it was, what's his name? The guy who's
Chris Harris.
Chris Harris. Yeah. And a couple others, Monty Brown.
They got R-Truth.
Yeah, but they had R-Truth before TNA had R-Truth.
But not only, I got to say one thing about R-Truth, though, lest we forget, because I remember when he came in. That was a big deal when he came in, because TNA, I know now he's a comedy wrestler, fine. But TNA made him into a bigger star than he had ever been. He became the NWA World Champion. He was such a big star. This is how you know WWE recognized it, because the name they gave him was a reflection of what his TNA name was. I mean, they didn't even all of a sudden go like, hey,
K-Quick.
Yeah, K-Quick is back. Wow. No, they acknowledged this is Ron the Truth Killings. Like they acknowledged that. So, I mean, like that to me was one of the success stories, even though they turned him. Look, I have no problem with wrestlers that play the comedy role. I think R-Truth is phenomenal, but he was very quickly in a very different place than where he was when he came in.
Yeah, all the way to the bank.
No, you're right. No, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, but that's changed in the last few years. It's sort of been subtle, but you've seen WWE pick up some Impact guys and do well with them. You see, what Wesley is doing on NXT and AEW as well. Whether it was Ethan Page or some others that they grabbed, who I think have been good pickups. I mean, these aren't world beater kind of guys, but they're good, solid hands. And if Impact can keep up with that and develop the reputation for scouting talent early, in Page's case, maybe not that early, but being the guys that identify those next new stars, that could be a really important role for them. And so I think they need to jump into that. I think getting behind Steve Maclin is the kind of thing you do. And, Maclin fits that mold of a guy who was in WWE developmental, didn't really work out. WWE didn't see anything in him. And rather than take the guy and kind of like, oh, he was on WWE, let's put him on television and keep the same gimmick and cash in, they stripped it down, repackaged him, and came up with something that really works. And now, if he so chooses, I imagine Maclin will be a much more important commodity whenever his contract comes up. And that's exactly how this is supposed to work. So good for them. I think Scott D'Amore is a real smart guy. So, I think they've settled into something. And I think the TNA stench, it's tough because on one hand, it's the TNA stench. On the other hand, it's the TNA legacy. It's 20-something years of history and a company that at one time was pretty successful and, drawing more viewers than Monday Night Raw does now and on some weeks. So as kind of laughable as it was, TNA was a big deal for a while, and you don't want to abandon that legacy altogether. So it's complicated, right?
It's very complicated, yeah. Almost with them themselves, whenever they're kind of referring to their history as TNA or bringing up things from the past, they kind of do it in almost like a backhanded kind of compliment way, where we are maybe a little bit embarrassed by this, but it's still our history, and so here you go with it. I think credit to Scott D'Amore, you brought him up there, Al. He's been a very steady hand for Impact, which is something they didn't always have throughout the years. There was so much turnover in creative and management in TNA. Scott D'Amore is a very creative guy. He's also very smart and has a very good eye for talent. And I think that has served them well in the past few years as they transitioned into this new kind of era of the company.
Yeah, he's also a good on-air authority figure in that he sort of plays it straight. He's, I was going to say, Jack Tunney. But that's good though, right? Because he's the authority figure that could take a bump, right? So he gets out there and he gets in wrestlers' faces, and he has a little bit of credibility because he was a wrestler. But he could also knock him out, and the fans get outraged when he do. So it makes for good television.
I think it's nice to have a credible babyface authority figure. Right. Like that's a real throwback in wrestling that you don't see a lot anymore. That type of role, and he does it well.
But also a guy credible. But also, you could beat him up, and he should get beaten up, right?
Yeah.
So he's a guy who, when Maclin sucker punches him from the back, he should sell it like he was,
right.
knocked
but
out.
I mean, credible in the sense that, fans take him seriously.
Sure. Yeah.
He's not like, so that when something happens, people care, that kind of thing.
And also another guy who, that's the thing about TNA is that there's a real positive part of that legacy, right? And, his act, what were they called? The
Team Canada.
Team Canada, yeah, with Bobby Roode and Eric Young. That was one of the highlights of their formative days. It was a good act. And, as were the Motor City Machine Guns and some other stuff. So they've got real positive parts of their legacy. And I think, that it's finding that balance where you can remind, older fans of this was really cool stuff we used to do and it's part of our history, and maybe make them forget about Dixie Carter and some other stuff that you're not so proud of. Let's pivot to talking about AEW. Again, for so many months, it seemed like they had lost so much momentum because WWE was really coming on strong and building to WrestleMania, and then the Endeavor merger, all that. It feels like right after WrestleMania, they sort of seize on the opportunity of like, okay, WWE's kind of moving on. We have a little bit of an opening here. Let's make some news, and they've been doing it. The Dynamite after WrestleMania, they announced they're coming to Wembley Stadium for what should be their biggest show ever, All In. And around the same time, whether it's intended or not, the rumors start swirling again about CM Punk's return. Let's start there. Brian, we often talk about what's best for business. This is a tricky one, right? Because on one hand, he's maybe the biggest star in your company, one of the biggest stars in all of wrestling, a proven needle mover when he first showed up to AEW now a couple of years ago, less so toward the end of his run last year, a terrific performer when inspired, but potentially, and I don't want to overstate things, but is it too much to say a cancer in your locker room? I mean, I think it was, some people would call him that, at least he was once, but certainly a disruptive presence in your locker room, a potential, someone with the potential to really lower morale back there. So you have to balance that out. And he's a guy who's not just rubbing, the Colt Cabanas of the world the wrong way, but your executive VPs, right? I mean, he's out there like mother effing, your executive VPs, whether it's Tony Khan, not so much, but the Bucks and Omega and all that, that's a real problem. So the talk is he's likely coming back, that, Tony Khan is figuring out some kind of deal. It's unclear whether this comes with some kind of apology or some show of remorse, some accountability by Punk for his role in the whole blow up. But this is all to say, is this the right move, Brian? And is this what's best for AEW's business?
I think it is the right move. And I think I put some conditions on this. When I heard the Wembley Stadium thing, the first thing I thought of in my head, he's definitely coming back. Because otherwise, why in the world? I know people have questioned the business decisions of Tony Khan. And in my head, I'm thinking like, if this was anybody whose wrestling judgment is really solid and their business acumen is really solid, then absolutely the reason that you booked Wembley Stadium is because you have lined up CM Punk versus Kenny Omega, or CM Punk and FDR versus Kenny Omega and the Bucks, something like that. Already signed, sealed, delivered. Otherwise, you're facing a potential disaster, at least in my eyes. I mean, I feel like, I know they have a long lead time and everything, but correct me if I'm wrong. And Jason, I think the visibility of AEW is lower in the UK than it is here. And so I would question their ability to sell out a stadium of that size here, So, I mean, the idea that you have to have something very special. Otherwise, why would you do that? Now, I don't know that that's a given, because we've seen this company make some really baffling decisions in the past, but I think it's very, very likely. And I think it's the thing you got to do. I think everybody, and this goes for Punk too, everybody, you need to put it aside. It's over. Look, This is not the first locker room fight that has happened in wrestling history. For God's sake, you've got to set it aside and realize you have the ability to do something really special here. You want to get your momentum back from WWE. You want to get the buzz back and all this at a time when a lot of people are questioning WWE's top creative. This is the moment to do it. This is what you do. You set it aside. Do I think that Punk is going to live happily ever after and have a long, fruitful career with AEW? I think that's probably not the way to go. But I think in the short term, to pop some good numbers with him and pay off and give fans something that they could really say, oh my God, I cannot miss this show. I think it absolutely is the right thing to do to bring him back. You don't have to love everyone that you work with. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And Jason, I'm going to go to you for a second, but a couple of things on that. And I think you clarified it. Maybe not necessarily the best long-term move, but you've got this show. You need it to be important. You need to put as many people in that building as you can. But devil's advocate, you got shows after that and months after that and years after that. And the issue really was, all out last year is where the powder keg exploded. And there was that fight, but really it had been growing for the whole time that Punk had been there. We'd been hearing stories about how difficult he was to work with. So this really is about more than just one locker room fight. It's about a guy who people had a really hard time getting along with, and morale is an important thing. And I think that's where the decision has to be made, even beyond this one show. Now, if it's a matter of like, do we bring him back for one night? That's fine. I mean, then it's sort of like the special attraction thing. But beyond that, I guess the talk is they're launching this new show on Saturdays, and there's talk that it's going to kind of be built around CM Punk, whatever that is. So beyond one show, it sounds like the plans are for him to be back and very much factor into their plans and be one of the guys they build around. And I don't know how some people, I imagine it's going to require some conversations and some self-awareness that hasn't been there on all parts. And this isn't all on Punk. Not everything that he said was off. He made some valid points. I don't know if he dealt with it the most professional way, but it's not to say, Punk was 100% wrong and everybody else was 100% right. But Jason, I guess I'll ask you the same thing. Do you think this would be a good move for AEW?
I think I'll agree with Brian. In the short term, yes, it's a great move. And in terms of building up to the Wembley show and helping sell it out or get whatever ticket sales you can, it's a smart move. He has a track record that isn't sparkling in this kind of a scenario. Everywhere he has gone, it seems to have ended the same way, with maybe the exception of Ring of Honor. I don't know what's going to be different this time, and I've heard rumors like this new Saturday show is pretty much going to be based on the fact that he can't be in the same place as maybe Omega and the Bucks and stuff, so it'll be separate rosters for all intents and purposes. So from a business perspective, it's absolutely smart for AEW. I just don't know from a morale perspective and how that's going to play out.
Here's the issue with Punk, if I can add something to this. Look, it's no secret. This isn't, headlines or anything, that he's got an ego. He's one of these guys that has a very keen sense of his self-worth, maybe a little inflated at times, but he's not your typical wrestler. A lot of times we're used to wrestlers who are just willing to just get stepped on and rolled over, and that's just the way the business works. Do whatever you want because I want to keep my spot. I want to keep my job, and that's the expectation. Punk is not one of the guys that does that. And the problem is he's not perfect. You take a guy like that and you put him in a scenario like AEW. That's like it can be a powder keg, because look, this guy had issues in WWE, which is a far more, from everything we know and have heard, a far more kind of professional type of environment, a lot more centralized control at the top, of Vince McMahon really kind of holding everything down and calling the shots in a much more authoritative way than we see with Tony Khan. And even there, Punk had a hard time coexisting because of everything he would perceive as personal slights and times that he felt like he wasn't being positioned the right way. Fine. And when he left, I mean, I was behind him when he left because I said, you got to look out for yourself in the business, and more guys should be looking out for themselves. But you take a guy like that, who has that attitude, and you put him in a place like AEW, which can sometimes be like a kindergarten or something. It's almost like the perfect storm of disaster, because he can't let things roll off his back the way some people can. So, I mean, that's where I see like the two-way street. He's not totally wrong. He didn't handle things the right way. I can also imagine frustration with the people that he's had frustration with. I feel frustration just hearing about the things they do and say. So, I mean, I get it. But that's why I think that I don't know if it's a long-term fit, but I do think for short-term business and to get people thinking AEW is hot again, it's the move for now.
Yeah. I think you really touch on something interesting, which is, the same factors that make Punk so difficult to work with are why he is the star that he is, right? I mean, he is kind of his own man. It's the whole Punk culture thing, right? I mean, he marches to the beat of his own drum. He could give a damn what authority says. He's going to always do what's best for him and look out for himself. And I think that's what's ingratiated him to fans over the years, and what makes it so difficult for him to exist in a culture like AEW, where it is very kumbaya. We're all in this together. It's younger, and he's probably rolling his eyes a lot, in that locker room, just about how people talk and get along. And, this just came to my mind, but I was in a GameStop the other day looking for something for one of my kids, and they've got these Street Fighter branded AEW toys, right? And there's like an old wrestling buddy that is Kenny Omega, but it's Kenny Omega as a certain Street Fighter character. I don't know Street Fighter real well, and they have a bunch of figures too. And to me, that is so like inside. I mean, for one thing, they didn't seem to be selling real well, right? But it's such a, I think that's the kind of idea you have when you got a bunch of buddies who are really into Street Fighter video games running this company, right? It's like, would it be really cool if we made like Street Fighter figures, but they were us? And
they do the stuff for themselves. They do it to pop themselves. Yeah.
And some of it works, some of it doesn't work. Again, I've had mixed feelings on the Punk thing. I also totally get the importance of morale, and you can't, regardless of whether they should be that way, the reality is that the brain trust in AEW is a certain way. And you throw in this kind of toxic, ingredient in there that just cannot play well with others. And, you could say, well, but he drives ratings and all that. But also, people have to work with this guy every day. And I think we've all been in those jobs where there's that one guy, and he might sell more printers than anybody, in the office and deliver the big numbers. But he's impossible to be around. And you have to make that decision. Is it worth it?
Yeah, and I think in this scenario, look, even if you go, you play on the reality of it, it seems like, even though Punk has his supporters, it seems like the majority of the AEW fan base itself would be behind the Elite and is on the Elite side of this. I think the natural thing to do is have Punk be the heel in the scenario, and a strong heel. And honestly, if he really wants to do business and he can swallow his pride in that scenario, then the Elite need to go over strong. Even though it's not something that I would like to see. I think if you're talking best for business and you're talking, are we really going to do this and make the most of it? Give the fans what they want. Give these fans what they want. I think I get the sense that that's what they would want, is this arrogant jerk off who came into our locker room that we love of AEW and tried to like turn it into WWE or whoever you want to spin it. Screw this guy and let's see him get humiliated and soundly thrashed. I think maybe that's the way you go with it.
Yeah. Maybe one of the
especially if it's going to be short term and you're not going to build a whole show around him, obviously.
I think maybe one of the hottest things they could do is actually bring him back in that kind of a character where he just rails against everything that AEW is and everything it became.
I think he should have came in from the beginning that way. That was what I was saying.
How do you guys, Jason? How do you think fans receive him? So Punk shows up on Dynamite next week. The music plays. He walks in. what's the reaction?
People will go nuts. They'll love him. They will. They'll give him that pop that he gets, because there's very few people who get the pop that he does. So it'll be
even
huge.
now, because I do wonder how much kind of built-in, AEW, we're with the team, that kind of loyalist resentment. How much do they see him as the guy who kind of ruined everything?
I don't think they will. I think they'll embrace him until he gives them a reason on the microphone not to. I think they'll love him.
Yeah. And the other question, Jason, we touched on it, whether it's Punk versus Omega, Punk and FTR versus the Elite, which seems to be, it's certainly the match that FTR wants to do. How big is that match? I mean, is that the biggest thing? What you're talking about, Wembley Stadium? I guess it fits 80,000 people. I don't know realistically anybody thinks they're going to get 80,000 people in there. I'd be happy to be proven wrong. Is that the biggest match that they could put on?
It's maybe the biggest match they can put on, but it's not 80,000 seats big, I think. And that's the difference. I mean, I don't know if there's any match that AEW can put on that will be, I'm buying a ticket to that for that match. It's more of people are coming to see AEW at Wembley. Yeah. That's what this is going to be sold on. There's no British Bulldog type of character that's going to sell those amount of tickets. So whether, I think something like Punk versus Omega, or a 6-man with Punk and the FTR against the Elite, is probably,
or even a double bill of the two matches, maybe Punk versus Omega and Bucks versus FTR as like a double bill kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah. And you throw in I guess it's also been discussed, the Sting retirement. If you did something like that, that'd be a big deal. Interesting that nowhere in this. Yeah. Interesting that nowhere in this conversation are we talking about their world champion, MJF, and how dare you? He's from my backyard. We just had the MJF Day here on Long Island a couple of weeks ago. But it is interesting. We should talk a little bit about the MJF experiment and how it's going. Double or Nothing, one of their big tentpole shows. It looks like the plan is a 4-way with the 4 pillars of AEW. Which I think will be a really good match. I don't know how marquee, how much box office it is. But this is all to say, Brian, how do you think MJF is doing?
Well, I want to say with him related to Wembley, I was thinking about this, that if let's just say you get Punk back, yes, I'll come back, but no, I will not. Omega and those guys say, we're not getting in the ring with that guy. Forget about it. Then your plan B could be, and this is not as good, but your strong plan B could be doing Punk and MJF for the title, which was the match that was supposed to happen and never happened. I know it happened, but that was supposed to be the passing of the torch kind of thing that didn't quite happen for MJF. It wound up being Moxley instead. So, they could do something with that potentially. I think MJF is a great, strong talent. I think he is stuck in a situation where he's being limited by creative, and I think that's the problem. And it really stands out. Like the opening of the show of Dynamite this week is a great example, because that until he showed up, that was terrible. I don't think there's anybody that would where they had Darby Allin, Jungle Boy, Sammy Guevara again having this debate over, I paid my dues, I came here, I lived in my car, I did this, you had everything handed to you on a silver platter, and none of these guys really seeming to have the confidence on the mic, especially Jungle Boy. And then MJF walks in, and immediately the segment is entertaining. He immediately just lifts it up. You can actually hear what he's saying. It just, he comes across as more of a star, more ready, because that segment was rough. It was brutal. I feel like if I had never watched wrestling before and I started the show and that's how the show started, I would feel like I never wanted to watch it again. So, he's got enormous potential. They just have to harness it and handle it. I'm glad they're maybe keeping away from these weird autobiographical soliloquies about traumatic experiences, very strange stuff. But under the right circumstances, the potential is still limitless for the guy.
And I think there's still this pent up demand for an MJF babyface run, and I think he'll eventually get there, but it's about when the timing is right. Maybe
Right.
CM Punk is the one to do that, right? I mean, a heel CM Punk with MJF representing AEW against him, that might be the perfect kind of conditions to pull the trigger on MJF babyface turn.
That could be. And also MGF, everything I've seen and heard and know about him, he also comes across as the type of a guy that, even though I don't think there's love lost between him and Punk either, I think he's way more likely to do business because I think, to be frank, and this is my own personal opinion, I think he understands the business better, even though he's younger than those other guys. I think he gets it in the old school sense of like, we're here to make money. And I may think you're a jerk and you think I'm a jerk, but this is the smart move. I think he's way more likely to do that and really run with it too.
Yeah. Did you see those comments from Adam Page about taking criticism? And this was one of the criticisms from Punk that, Page sort of like blew off guys like him and what do you know? And he all but confirmed it, right? And I think that's one of the things you're touching on, Brian, in terms of some of these younger guys.
Yeah, and it was funny because there was a comment from Page recently. I forget what context it came from Hangman Page, where it had to do with something about the younger wrestlers learning from I don't know if you guys know what I'm talking about. He just said this a day or two ago.
I think that's what I'm talking about. Yeah,
But it was almost like he was saying, well, that doesn't really apply to me. I'm talking about the guys coming up behind me. Like they need to learn something. These guys that are like, I'm not really in that category. At least that's the sense that I got from it.
Yeah, and the reality is, I don't know, is it too much to call him a disappointment? But his world title run, it didn't set the world on fire.
I was sad about that because I really thought he was going to do better there. I think he's great. I think he's got something. There's something about him. He has like a certain it factor, like that intangible thing that you can't quantify. I can't really explain it, but he's got it. But I feel like, he's just not. It's not clicking. It's not. I don't know if maybe WWE would have handled him better, but it's not clicking to me.
Yeah. That's what kind of concerns me about the MJF title run, is that the Adam Page one ended up being very underwhelming, and so far the MJF one, in my opinion, has been as well. I think MJF has actually done better than the creative and the situations he's been put in, but it still hasn't been great, and so there's kind of parallels there, and I'm hoping both of them can kind of rebound from that and get back to where they maybe once were.
Yeah, because Page has this interesting persona that I think you could do a lot with, where it's like he's unique. He's this baby face that is very likable, but he comes across as someone with a lot of doubt and like a lot of angst. But it doesn't make him weak. He like pulls it off in a way that he's a very relatable character. He's like a hero who doubts himself, but in the end, the audience knows that he could do it. They believe in him more than he believes in himself. I think it's like it's an interesting thing that you don't see that type a lot in wrestling.
Yeah, I think one of the other factors here is that, when you talk about MJF and Hangman Page and the fact that both of those title runs, again, weren't all that exciting. I think MJF is doing fine and has had some really good matches, but I think some of it is a reflection, and you compare and contrast that against Chris Jericho's title run and Moxley's title runs and even Punk, and how much more attention those got. Some of that speaks to WWE, right? And the value of having been a star in WWE. They did this event out here on Long Island a few weeks ago with MJF, where he was getting, before they did on TV, he was getting a key to the town of Oyster Bay, where he's from. And they invited some media. And I went over there and expecting MJF, big TV star on Long Island, is going to be available for autographs, whatever, expecting to pull into Oyster Bay Town Hall and not be able to find anywhere to park because it's going to be so crowded. There were 25 fans there, something like that, it's fine, respectable. They couldn't even fill this small auditorium in Oyster Bay Town Hall. if that was CM Punk, if that was Chris Jericho, if that was John Moxley, Bryan Danielson, I guarantee it would be a lot different. And that's the thing. There is being a star in AEW, and then there's being a wrestling star. And that's what Punk brings to the table, and Jericho and Moxley and some others. And the reality is that that's a product of having been a star in WWE, and it's what MJF doesn't have. It's what Hangman Page doesn't have. It certainly shouldn't be everything, but it's a factor in terms of business, I think, for sure. Why don't we, at a little bit of time we've got left here, talk a little bit about WWE, and we're now not quite a month removed from WrestleMania, but a few weeks. And Brian, last time we were talking, we were trying to kind of put in perspective, was this a good move? Not going with Cody. Now a few weeks removed, they've turned the page. Cody's working with Brock. We basically have a card for Backlash. Roman Reigns is nowhere to be found. Cody's working with Brock Lesnar. Is the move looking any? And different people have weighed in on it, for what that's worth. We've seen some people who are pretty respected, and Steve Austin among them, thinking that it was a fantastic finish. Dustin Rhodes also praised the finish, thought it was the right thing to do, with this idea that make them wait for it, kind of thing, and you'll build that anticipation by putting off that win a little longer. Is the decision looking any better, any worse?
I've tried to convince myself that what they're doing is Rocky and Rocky 2. That the first match, Rocky didn't.
Don't mention that to CM Punk. You might go crazy.
Rocky 3, baby. Rocky 3.
Never saw it. Don't know what it is. So I'm hoping this is what they're going for WrestleMania 40, is the rematch and Cody wins, just like Rocky 2.
I assume that, being in the building, as soon as we saw the finish, and I mentioned this in the last podcast, as soon as he was done and Cody got pinned, I thought, all right, we've got the main event to WrestleMania 40, and it is the rematch. But I don't know.
A year, though? A year? Yeah. You really think? See, the problem was, I think, Cody getting hurt. As I think I said this last time, I think that the plan may have always been he loses the first one, wins the second one, but I think it was supposed to be SummerSlam, WrestleMania, because if you're going to do Rocky 2, the place to do Rocky 2 is WrestleMania, not SummerSlam. It just seems so backwards to me. So the more I now, with hindsight, look at it, I think this was the plan, but I think they should have shifted gears. They should have said, okay, we're going to change this now to make this something more satisfying, because I have not changed my stance on this. It still feels wrong. Even if he gets it in the end, which I think he probably will at some point, it's still not going to be as big of a deal. Look, and honestly, I'm still not convinced that this isn't some weird head game here, because I'm playing the wait and see with what happens with Lesnar. Because if you're thinking, even though I don't agree with it, if your thinking is, okay, he's going to go over Lesnar, which is going to make him look which is going to rehabilitate him. He's going to look super strong, and now he'll be ready to come back at Roman. Oh my God, this guy beat Brock Lesnar. I still say, why couldn't you do that with Cody as the champion? But if he loses to Lesnar, then I know the game is over. Then I know the weird game they're playing. If Lesnar comes out of this feud on top, Cody's dead. He's done.
The feud. But not necessarily the match, right? Because I think it's very. If I had to put money on it, I think I'd bet on Lesnar at Backlash. In as much as this is going to be a program, and I think if this is a program, I think it makes sense to have Brock win it, and have whether you build up to SummerSlam or what have you.
I just think,
but there's 11 months to kill still.
I know, but I think Cody is on a precipice where it's like he is, like we saw in AEW, even though it's a very different fan base, he's the kind of a baby face that fans can turn on very easily. If he's not positioned the right way, he can turn into Kurt Angle or something, and that type of a character where it's like the corny, disingenuous, insufferable babyface wannabe. Like that could happen very easily. So I question the wisdom. He needs something really strong. And if they go, oh, now he's going to feud with Lesnar. And you know what? He's going to lose again because he's got to earn it and he's got to come back. It's like, at what point does the freaking guy beat somebody? He's got to be carefully handled. And this is not what I call careful handling at all. This is playing with fire of having the fans turn on him.
Yeah, I have all the same reservations. I also think there is a way that it can work, right? I think there's a way where March, this time next year or March of next year, we're saying, you know what, it all worked out. And now this match is bigger than ever. And you bring up, Jason, the Rocky analogy. Where's WrestleMania 40 going to be?
Philadelphia.
Philadelphia with Rocky on the statue, the Rocky statue on the steps right there. So, there's absolutely a way that this ends up better than, the scenario that we wanted. But it takes a lot of patience, a lot of careful planning. And not to just have a rerun of our last episode, what makes me nervous about all of it now is the return of Vince McMahon. If you put this in the hands of Paul Levesque, of Triple H, I'm confident that he could pull it off and Cody could pull it off. I don't know that Vince McMahon 3 months from now is like, forget it. We're changing plans and whatever. Bray Wyatt's the champion or something.
Austin Theory. Yes.
Yeah. So I think there's a way they get there. Let's talk about Roman Reigns, who is our current world champion. Nowhere to be seen. Yeah, we heard that he might take some time off. To me, that's kind of like the more puzzling part is what do you do with this guy between now and next year's WrestleMania? I mean, you can throw new opponents, and I'm fine with them like filling some time, between major shows. They don't all have to be the biggest in the world. Now that Nakamura's back on TV and seems to be getting a little attention, I wondered, do they build him up to be the next challenger to beat him? And I think that's fine, but I'd be interested in seeing it in the ring, Nakamura and Roman Reigns. So I'll ask you that, Jason. And also, I guess part of that, how does the draft maybe figure into this in terms of making some moves that maybe freshen things up a little bit?
In terms of Roman, I think there is still some money matches to be had there. I think there's a lot of meat on the bone still left on the Seth Rollins feud and going somewhere with that. There's some other matches there, Sheamus, Gunther, things like that. In terms of how the draft's going to affect this, I don't know, because I still don't know. Are WWE committed to separate brands? Are they not? With the draft, yes, it seems like they are, but I actually said to Kevin, our editor this week, I'm having trouble doing the WWE ratings because I don't know who works on what show anymore. They're back and forward. So what I would like to see from the draft is a clear division of the two rosters with Roman as the champion appearing on both shows. That's fine to build up whoever he's feuding with, but I'm hoping that we will get at least some fresh matchups out of the draft.
Yeah. The other thing that you mentioned, Seth Rollins, and that's another name that's been in the news a little bit, and some buzz, some rumors about him maybe not being too happy with his spot in the company, him wanting that match at WrestleMania 40 with Roman. And I guess Roman, and how much of this is just for show, Roman suggesting maybe that is the match to do. Brian, I think they can have a hell of a match. I think Seth might be top to bottom, the best wrestler in the company. I think it's got very limited marquee value in that, we've kind of seen it, and Seth is what he is, and he's very good, but he is not that guy. I don't think that is going to take you to that next level. I mean, Cody feels like a moment in time, a real special situation, a guy, and the numbers bear that out. I don't see that with Seth at all.
No, and that would be if they go that route, that would be the classic, example of just a blown opportunity and just going with something safe and going back to the same stuff you've been doing. If I'm fantasy booking the impossible, and I'm not saying this would be someone to beat him, but a phenomenal thing that could happen is if they could lure Moxley back because of the Shield thing and the track record and everything that's happened, and him going to AEW and being a world champion there, but still being overshadowed by Roman. I think that could be massively huge. I still don't think it's a reason to not pull the trigger with Cody. But if there was a way, and I haven't heard a single rumor about it, but if there was a way, I think that would be enormous to do.
a triple threat match,
maybe that.
And
I don't
that
normally like them, but that would be a situation.
If ever there was a triple threat match, that would be it. Yeah. The kind of a smaller thing, but I think when we were talking leading into WrestleMania about, what else would we do to make this storyline that much better, Cody and Roman, that is, I brought up Dustin Rhodes, and that was impossible. Dustin's contract is up this year. He has said he's looking to retire. So all signs are he is going to be free at the end of the year or sometime later this year to join his brother in WWE. Not that that's a huge factor, but again, in terms of little things that can make that story more compelling, I think Dustin in Cody's corner, sort of filling the role of his father, and encouraging him, I think could be really special.
Yeah, because Dustin.
Sorry, Brian, go ahead.
Jason, no, go, please.
I was just going to say he could be the Burgess Meredith kind of character.
Yes,
more takes him out, and that's
just. I hope he doesn't get killed, though. That's the only thing.
Well, yeah, okay.
Yeah, let's keep Mr. T out of the building.
He's also, he's a lot older than Cody, and so there is that. There is that whole sense of like him being a surrogate and being like more than just the brother. He's like the mentor. He could be the coach. Yeah, I mean, you can do a lot with that. And if he comes back, most certainly you're talking Hall of Fame. So, yes. I mean, you can bundle that all together. If that's next year's WrestleMania, you got Dustin going in the Hall of Fame. You got Cody potentially getting the belt. I mean, that, if they can sustain it till then, that would make it all worth it. But
I think we've convinced Brian.
That's a big if. That's a big if.
Yes, very big if.
And kind of going full circle to we're talking about Nick Aldis. I mean, sometimes it's the right guy in just the right circumstances. The reality is Dustin Rhodes can only mean so much in AEW right now, and it is neither a slight on AEW management or decision makers or Dustin Rhodes, but he's going to be in the spot that he's in. He comes from WWE, not that he's like the top guy, but he has that ready-made storyline with his brother, and again filling the role of their father. Like you touched on Hall of Fame, it just makes all the sense in the world. So hopefully, and I don't care if he wrestles or not. I mean, I think he could still go. The guy looks great. He looks better at whatever he is now, 52, 53 years old, than he did literally 20 years ago. I mean, he's in fantastic shape. So I don't doubt that he could go. But yeah, we'll see. All right, guys. I never totally got the plugs out of the way, so just one more reminder: June issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. Lots of fun stuff in here. Jason's story about the knockouts on the cover. Your hot seat interview, Brian, with Nick Aldis. I've got a feature in here about Bray Wyatt. There's stuff in here about AEW's good guy, bad guy problem, and a lot more. Pick it up on newsstands now, or go over to pwi-online.com and subscribe. Anything else you guys want to plug real quick?
Well, I guess there's my podcast, Shut Up and Wrestle, which I've had a lot of great guests recently. I had Ken Patera on very recently. I would encourage people to check out that one. It's a must listen. But
the Jailbird.
That's right. We talked about that. We talked about the McDonald's. He brought it up. I didn't.
Whenever my brother and my old friends, when we were watching wrestling in the 80s, we still make jokes about the Jailbird just because, Heenan calling him the Jailbird.
Yep. And I actually got to tell him that was my first exposure to him. So I was a kid, I didn't even know that he had been this monster heel. Like I just thought he was this sympathetic character. But I mean, he's the kind of guy that will just say anything that comes to mind, and he does. So it was a great episode. I'm proud of that one. So it's Shut Up and Wrestle with Brian R. Solomon. People could find it wherever they find their podcasts.
Yes. And Jason, I never even got your Twitter up here because I wasn't sure if you were joining us. But are you even on Twitter? I don't know. I
am. Yes, you can find me at JBladeKO on Twitter. And just a bit of a plug for the PWI Weekly as well. It hits inboxes every Monday. It's absolutely free, so you can go on to pwi-online.com and sign up for that. There's some good content on there.
Yep, and certainly as we get closer to the Wembley show, and also Money in the Bank is coming to your neck of the woods, right?
Big things here.
Yeah, so we'll be talking for sure. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining me. Everybody else, we will be back soon.
Thanks so much.